this is Kelly Sadler, and this is the Washington Times Politically Unstable. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Roy Eappen. He's a practicing endocrinologist and a senior fellow at Do No Harm, and we're going to talk about transgender therapies for minor children. The Supreme Court has upheld Tennessee's ban on transitioning minor children with different drugs and puberty blockers, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also been some recent research that has come out that talks about how harmful this is for young children and for parents to engage their young children along this transitioning process. Dr. Roy wrote us a column at the Washington Times. Please check that out at thewashingtontimes.com. But Dr. Roy, could you kind of give us a summary of the column that you wrote for us and of this recent, medical research that has come out that just shows how dangerous procedures these are on young kids?
I work with the Do No Harm people, and we basically have seen for some time that there's major risks to treating these children with gender dysphoria with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. And there have been multiple systematic reviews done all over the world, in Sweden, in the United Kingdom, in Canada, even in the United States, showing that there is very little benefit to these procedures. And, if there's no benefit and risk of substantial harm, you shouldn't be doing them. Unfortunately, we've been taken over, the medical field has been taken over to some extent by an activist class who has decided that, in spite of the fact that I think they themselves acknowledge there's no benefit, think that they should go ahead with these things. So when the state sees that the doctors are not following the evidence, I think they have a justifiable right to regulate that practice. Which is the case in 25 to 27 of the states in the United States. These were, of course, all taken to court. And the one that was the leading case was the Scrimetti case from Tennessee. And yesterday, in a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that the states do have the right to regulate this area.
And of course, Justice Roberts used the rationale that minors cannot buy cigarettes, they cannot get tattoos, they cannot purchase alcohol. So there really is no violation of equal protection under the 14th Amendment. They did not go into the medical rationale or reasons or justification for these transitions. But recently, and in your column, you identified a recent study about young boys transitioning and some of the adverse events that happens to them. Can you kind of detail that to our audience?
So there was a review study and one of the co-authors, Dr. Schwartz, is one of my colleagues at Do No Harm, which looked at giving estrogen therapy to boys, so for transgender boys, and it was quite disconcerting because it showed many risks in terms of cognition, in terms of cardiovascular disease, in terms of cancer, and even overall mortality. Now, this is actually being known for a while that some of these risks were there, but people seem to have ignored them, which is another reason that I think we should not be doing these things, because I don't think we've been giving proper informed consent to these children or their parents. So that study came out within the last couple of weeks. And I think it's justified that the courts are not there to be a medical regulator. I think that's up to the state and the profession. The other thing that's interesting is there's a Dr. Olson Kennedy who was given $9 or $10 million in funds from the NIH to do studies on these kids with gender dysphoria to look if there was some benefit to the puberty blockers. And she actually, in the New York Times several months ago, said that she wasn't going to release this data because it didn't show any advantage. the Do No Harm people asked for a freedom of information request to get that data. And I think because of that, and several other organizations also asked for a freedom of information access request, she published the data in a preprint, which basically confirmed that there was no advantage to giving the puberty blockers. But her conclusion was that it's still good to give them because she expected these children to get worse, which is sort of medical magic.
Well, I mean, isn't the whole reason, and these trans activists are advocating for this, is because if these children do not undergo these chemical transitions, then they're more likely to commit suicide. Isn't that the whole premise of the trans activism among minor kids?
Yes, and that's patently false. In fact, under questioning, the ACLU lawyer, I think it was Justice Alito, basically pointed out that there was no evidence that, in fact, that this was in part the case. And Chase Strangio, the lawyer for the ACLU, basically admitted that's true. There are multiple studies showing that, that it really is not related to the transgender part. It's really related to the other mental health conditions. When you talk about suicide, they looked at a study, and the Dr. Lewis Appleby, who was in charge of suicide prevention in the United Kingdom, looked at kids who were waiting for access to this so-called gender-affirming care to see if there was an increased risk of suicide, and there was none of that was found. There were also studies done in Finland, which also showed that if you do a comparison group, there isn't this increase in suicide. And I actually think it's quite irresponsible to keep talking about saying these kids are going to commit suicide, because, as you know, suicide can be a social contagion. And just talking about it over and over and over again is sort of encouraging these poor kids to do these kind of things.
Well, can't this gender affirming care also be a social contagion? There's so much about it in the news. There's so many parents now, especially of celebrity parents whose children are transitioning. It almost feels as though it's kind of the popular progressive left thing to have a transgender child.
Unfortunately, I think that seems to be the case. And, it's interesting. If you look at the numbers of these kids, in the old days, it used to be mostly male to female. Now it's many, many more times female to male. And there are there are classrooms in the United Kingdom where they were saying like 30% of the girls in a class thought they were transgender. I think this is a social contagion.
Wow. It's really, really unbelievable. But going through your teenage years is frustrating and difficult for all of us, right? There's a lot of hormones happening, a lot of new challenges, both from society, within your peer group. It's just a challenging time in life. What would you recommend if somebody's child says, I think I really am a boy, I'm not a girl? What are the first steps in addressing that? Because it sounds to me like it's more of a mental health issue than it is a physical issue.
So if you look at a lot of these kids, if you let them just go on to puberty and grow up, a lot of these kids will turn out to be gay. And I've written an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of years ago where I basically said this is the new gay conversion therapy. So I always tell parents to stay in touch with their kids. That's the most important thing. Always have an open line of communication and talk to them. And I think therapy first is the way to go, which has been the conclusion of multiple experts in this field, that therapy is the way to go. And we should not be using the medicalization. If these kids, when they grow up and are able to make these decisions for themselves, still want to persist with it, then that's their decision. But I think for children, it's not something we should be doing.
And isn't it true among the kids that have transitioned before puberty, by the time they reach adulthood, uh, they they regret their decision?
So regret and detransition is a very controversial area. Yes, I think there are some do, but I don't know. The problem is we don't follow these kids to adulthood long enough to do the studies to see how many of them actually do detransition. I mean, the standard rate told by the activists say it's only 1%. I'm sure it's many times that number. And a lot of these patients actually just quietly desist, like they stop taking the hormones and just go on and lead their lives. And you can see that a lot of these studies, there are huge dropout rates from these studies, and I think that's because a lot of these patients and children have just stopped thinking of themselves as trans and have moved on. But the detransition rate is probably much higher than the 1% that's quoted by the trans activists.
But isn't it true the harms are already done? Like your fertility might be affected, both male and female, by these hormones that you're taking pre-pubescent. So living a normal adult life might be more challenging.
Oh, very much so. I've spoken to many detransitioners who've told me that those kind of things, but some of them still are able to have children. But if you give puberty blockers to kids very early on in puberty at 10 or stage 2, they will probably, the people from WPATH who are the activists behind most of this have said that you will never experience an orgasm, which is part of being a human being.
It's unbelievable. I've read some exposés, and I just wanted to get your opinion on it and whether you've seen it professionally, of parents taking their young children for gender affirming care, and that's what they call it, to get them on puberty blockers or to try to transition them. And the doctors providing this care do not first offer them mental health services. They kind of coax them along the way and push these drugs on them without discussing with the parents and with the child all of the potential adverse effects of going through this process. Is that something that you've seen in practice? Medical providers basically pushing this on parents and children for, let's say, whatever their motives would be, profit motives is top of my mind.
I don't know what their motives are. I have seen people getting so-called gender-affirming care with the hormones and the puberty blockers after one visit. But I think it's more often that they get a few visits. But I think you really have to spend many, many hours before you even consider doing such things. And because the benefits seem to be very hard to tell which patients are going to benefit by this, and that there is risks to this, I think we shouldn't do it at all. I think we should just do the therapy part and leave the medicalization out. Certainly no surgery before 18. Certainly puberty blockers should basically be banned.
I mean, isn't that what they've done in Europe?
So in many countries, yes, in the United Kingdom, Baroness Cass, who was the head of the Royal College of Pediatrics, did a multi-year exhaustive review of the subject, and that should have been the end of it to some extent, and basically came to the conclusion that puberty blockers should only be given in terms of a scientific study, because the evidence for their benefit is so limited at this point. And in fact, the NHS no longer allows puberty blockers to be given, except in context of a study. And they are now considering banning cross-sex hormones as well. The NHS, the health minister in the United Kingdom. Their limitations have been placed in other countries, like in many of the Scandinavian countries have backed off on this, like Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and in other countries in the world, this is also happening. and of course in 25 states in the United States.
Well, I mean, I really do appreciate your time and expertise on this. I think as the more research comes up, it's kind of confirming what many parents have felt, that this is mutilating children. This is altering their life. This could be a social contagion, and minors should never be making, or you should be be making life altering decisions for minors. Once they, hit 18, 21, become full-fledged adults, you can do with your body what you want. But before then, it's very troubling. And it was good to see the Supreme Court uphold Tennessee's ban, which upholds the ban in 25 more states, as well as hopefully more states will join and ban these procedures. Thank you again for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.